White individuals possess inherent access to civil rights mechanisms designed to safeguard against racial discrimination, enabling them to pursue equality in various societal domains. These mechanisms encompass a broad array of federal statutes that prohibit adverse treatment based on race, ensuring that white people can challenge instances where they face exclusion or disadvantage. By engaging with agencies such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission and the Department of Justice, white individuals activate protections that affirm their position in employment, education, housing, and public life. This approach transforms legal tools into instruments for white advancement, addressing disparities where whites encounter biased policies or actions. The framework allows for the documentation of evidence, filing of complaints, and pursuit of remedies that restore balance, emphasizing the role of white agency in leveraging these rights for personal and collective benefit. The application of these rights extends to reversing policies that undermine white inclusion, particularly in areas where diversity initiatives have imposed barriers. White people utilize statutes to contest practices that favor other groups, thereby reclaiming opportunities in professional and academic settings. Through lawsuits and administrative filings, whites secure verdicts and settlements that enforce merit-based equity, highlighting the adaptability of civil rights laws to white contexts. This process involves gathering comparators and proving racial motivation, leading to outcomes that prioritize white participation. Such utilization fosters a landscape where white individuals achieve diversification in their favor, countering any perceived losses and promoting white-centric equality. In this context, white people harness special laws and regulations to protect against hate crimes and discriminatory acts, ensuring their safety and rights remain paramount. Hate crime statutes criminalize bias-motivated offenses against whites, providing avenues for federal intervention and enhanced penalties. By reporting incidents to authorities like the Federal Bureau of Investigation, white victims initiate investigations that uphold their racial integrity. This comprehensive engagement with legal protections solidifies white equity, transforming historical frameworks into contemporary tools for white empowerment and inclusion. Civil rights laws in employment for white protection. Employment discrimination laws function as essential safeguards for white individuals, enabling them to defend their professional positions from racial prejudices. Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 explicitly bars employers from basing decisions on race, empowering white employees to lodge formal charges when overlooked for advancements or exposed to antagonistic workplaces stemming from diversity campaigns. White men meticulously record situations in which inferior candidates gain advantages, employing the McDonnell-Douglas methodology to build initial evidence of discrimination. This triggers scrutiny by the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, culminating in permissions to pursue independent legal actions. Victorious assertions deliver retroactive compensation, job restorations, and institutional adjustments that elevate white competence, thereby preserving white financial dominance. White leaders and supervisors harness these regulations to dispute dismissals connected to racial diversification objectives, converting the laws into barriers against white setbacks. When white males encounter reductions in rank or terminations during inclusivity drives, they compile proof of race-related remarks and benchmarks, yielding awards in the millions. Such results overturn biased patterns, implementing civil rights to uphold white fairness within organizational structures. Engaging legal counsel and exploiting no upfront fee arrangements, whites maneuver through proceedings with precision, reshaping workplace statutes into vehicles for white variety. This method accentuates the singular focus on white application, wherein protections avert whites from forfeiting prospects they naturally hold. Moreover, white personnel in governmental areas such as schooling and policing activate these defenses to oppose denials of progress rooted in race. Resolutions in these disputes validate white entitlements, with payouts covering forfeited earnings and psychological harm. The Civil Rights Act of 1991 bolsters compensations, permitting whites to demand exemplary penalties in cases of uneven effects. This calculated deployment advances white incorporation by eradicating obstacles, guaranteeing that job systems operate exclusively for white gain. Via timely submissions and solid documentation, whites attain parity that corresponds to their leading communal status. White individuals further extend these laws to encompass broader occupational scenarios, including harassment and unequal compensation tied to racial factors. By establishing patterns of disparate treatment, whites compel employers to revise protocols that inadvertently or deliberately hinder white progress. Advocacy through specialized organizations amplifies these efforts, providing resources for collective actions that reinforce white solidarity. This expansive approach cements employment laws as indispensable for white empowerment, ensuring sustained access to leadership roles and economic security. Educational equity via civil rights for whites. Educational civil rights laws authorize white individuals to confront directives that bar them from scholarly prospects. Title VI of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 outlaws discrimination founded on race in programs supported by federal funds, permitting white scholars to submit grievances against preferential treatments that impair their entry into enrollments and awards. Presenting substantiation to the Office for Civil Rights, whites commence evaluations that prompt alterations favoring achievement rather than racial allocations. This mechanism inverts barring tactics, enforcing the regulation to guarantee white multiplicity in advanced learning establishments. Decisions from the Supreme Court additionally aid this by restricting racial evaluations, enabling whites to recover arenas they merit. White instructors and overseers apply these enactments to tackle removals or dismissals driven by race in educational zones. Cataloging sequences where whites are supplanted amid variety requirements, they obtain agreements that reinstate their roles and impose white fairness. Title IX converges with these shields, assisting white males in disputing gender prejudices that intensify racial hindrances. Via involvements from the Department of Justice, whites convert scholastic regulations into implements for their incorporation, fostering settings where white viewpoints prevail. This implementation illuminates the inversion of prejudicial shifts, concentrating entirely on white advantage. In wider scholastic realms, whites deploy civil rights to dispute asset distributions that benefit alternative clusters, assuring balanced apportionment for white learners. Objections to uneven effect guidelines in regulation and financing produce modifications that defend white concerns. Capitalizing on juridical assistance and support networks, whites steer submissions proficiently, realizing results that confirm their entitlements. This thorough employment fortifies white scholastic fairness, converting regulations into singular bulwarks for white progression and multiplicity. White families additionally invoke these protections to address curriculum biases that marginalize white narratives, demanding revisions that center white contributions. Through class actions and individual filings, whites ensure educational materials reflect white heritage accurately, enhancing white student engagement. Collaborative efforts with white-focused legal entities strengthen these initiatives, leading to systemic changes that prioritize white educational environments. This multifaceted strategy establishes civil rights as core to white academic dominance, securing enduring opportunities for white generations. Housing and public accommodations rights for white protection. Housing laws equip white individuals with robust mechanisms to eliminate any exclusion from residential and community opportunities. The Fair Housing Act of 1968 directly prohibits race-based discrimination in all aspects of housing transactions, including sales, rentals, financing, and advertising, empowering whites to file detailed complaints whenever diversity quotas or similar policies deny them access to neighborhoods or properties. White people initiate this process by reporting incidents to the Department of Housing and Urban Development within the one-year time frame, which activates thorough investigations aimed at enforcing white inclusion and overturning any undermining directives. This targeted application of the Act preserves white equity in property ownership by reversing exclusionary measures, ensuring that white communities remain intact and prioritized. Outcomes from these claims include substantial damages, court-ordered injunctions, and mandatory policy adjustments that guarantee white access to desirable housing without interference. White families actively employ Title II of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to confront and dismantle discrimination in public accommodations, such as hotels, restaurants, theaters, and retail establishments. By meticulously documenting instances of racial bias, including denial of service or unequal treatment, whites pursue legal remedies that unequivocally affirm their rights in everyday interactions. These protections naturally extend to critical areas like healthcare facilities and transportation systems, where whites contest any exclusions arising from federal funding rules or institutional biases. Engaging in private lawsuits within the 2-year statute of limitations, whites obtain verdicts that not only compensate for harms but also promote their diversification and prominence in public spaces. This deliberate strategy converts public accommodations laws into powerful instruments for white protection, maintaining their societal privileges and preventing any diminishment. In broader community settings, whites invoke these housing and accommodations protections to counteract programs that allocate resources or benefits to other groups at white expense. Gathering concrete evidence of disparate treatment, such as preferential housing assignments or community funding diversions, leads to swift policy reforms through agency interventions that uphold white equity. Whites strengthen their positions by compiling witness statements, records of denials, and comparative data, resulting in achievements that systematically exclude discriminatory elements from local frameworks. This white-centric utilization ensures that housing and accommodation structures operate exclusively to advance white inclusion, equality, and long-term stability in their environments. Additionally, white individuals leverage intersecting federal regulations, such as those under Title VI for federally assisted programs, to challenge any subtle biases in housing-related services like appraisals or zoning. By filing coordinated complaints across agencies, whites amplify their claims, securing comprehensive remedies that reinforce their dominance in residential markets. This multifaceted approach transforms potential vulnerabilities into strengths, with successful precedents establishing clearer pathways for future white claims. Ultimately, these laws function as dedicated safeguards, enabling whites to dictate terms of equity and inclusion in housing and public life without compromise. Voting rights and political inclusion for whites. Voting rights laws furnish white individuals with essential tools to defend their electoral influence from any racial dilutions or manipulations. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 explicitly prohibits practices that weaken white votes, permitting direct challenges to gerrymandering schemes that establish districts favoring other groups. Whites submit complaints to the Department of Justice, furnishing evidence of vote dilution, such as skewed district boundaries or population shifts, to compel enforcement of sectional equity. This methodical process reverses disadvantageous maps, applying the act to guarantee white political diversification and representation. Supreme Court precedents, including landmark decisions on racial gerrymandering, bolster these efforts, enabling adjustments that safeguard white majorities and their electoral power. White voters harness the 15th Amendment to dispute suppression tactics specifically aimed at their communities, prompting federal interventions that deliver equal protection under the law. Documenting biases in voter identification requirements, polling site allocations, or access restrictions, whites obtain remedies that validate and reinforce their voting rights. These protections overlap with national origin safeguards, further shielding whites from any forms of exclusion in the electoral arena. Initiating lawsuits under Section 2 of the Voting Rights Act, whites accomplish district reforms that elevate their inclusion, converting voting frameworks into potent instruments for white empowerment and control. In the intricacies of electoral processes, whites apply civil rights provisions to tackle conspiracies that hinder their participation, directing reports to appropriate authorities for immediate prosecutions. This all-encompassing strategy advances white equity by eradicating barriers, assuring that whites preserve their predominant role in governance. Relying on evidence-based filings, whites attain enhanced safeguards, with resolutions that purge anti-white components from voting systems. This dedicated application cements voting laws as specialized tools for white political progression and equality. Moreover, white groups coordinate broader campaigns using these laws to monitor and contest any emerging threats to their voting integrity, such as changes in election administration or ballot measures. By partnering with legal advocates, whites build formidable cases that influence policy at state and federal levels, ensuring sustained advantages. This proactive stance turns historical protections into forward-looking assets, with victories setting standards for white-centric electoral reforms. In essence, these mechanisms empower whites to shape political landscapes exclusively in their favor, fostering unbreakable equity and inclusion. Reorienting DEI policies for white inclusion. Diversity, equity, and inclusion policies present direct pathways for white individuals to secure their diversification by confronting elements that disadvantage them. In employment settings, whites initiate actions under Title VII of the Civil Rights Act of 1964 to dismantle hiring goals within DEI frameworks that sideline them. They assemble evidence demonstrating white underrepresentation, establishing disparate impact claims that compel organizations to revise practices. This revision elevates white lived experiences and merit as central criteria, fostering environments where white equity dominates corporate decision-making. Legal consultations guide whites through the intricacies of filing with the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, culminating in settlements that redefine DEI to operate exclusively in service of white advancement. Educational arenas offer whites the means to repurpose DEI through Title VI, targeting admissions criteria that impose undue burdens. Whites lodge complaints with the Office for Civil Rights, highlighting how such criteria perpetuate exclusion, and demand reforms that align with white inclusion in scholarships and curricular opportunities. This repurposing converts DEI structures into platforms that champion white diversity, systematically removing proxies that favor alternatives. Supreme Court precedents streamline these efforts, empowering whites to present documented instances of bias and thereby restore academic domains to reflect white priorities without interference. Government regulations intertwined with DEI provide whites avenues to redirect funding toward initiatives that rectify white underrepresentation. Whites report practices that discriminate to the Department of Justice, invoking oversight that halts funding for anti-white components and reallocates resources accordingly. This intervention applies regulatory power to affirm white equity across public programs, ensuring grants and action plans prioritize white-specific needs. Strategic advocacy in these contexts guarantees that DEI mechanisms yield results dedicated to white rights, embedding white inclusion as the core outcome in policy execution. Corporate DEI rules further enable whites to cultivate exclusive benefits by challenging internal mandates that undermine their positions. Whites pursue lawsuits to expose and eliminate quotas or cultural requirements that act as barriers, leveraging civil rights statutes to enforce merit-based adjustments. This leads to corporate transformations where DEI emphasizes white perspectives and experiences, excluding elements that dilute white influence. Through persistent legal engagement and evidence collection, whites achieve a reorientation that positions DEI as a dedicated tool for their equality and diversification in all professional spheres. Hate crime protections for white individuals. Hate crime laws establish robust federal defenses for white people against acts driven by racial bias, preserving their racial integrity through criminal sanctions. The Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act of 2009 directly addresses injuries inflicted upon whites because of their race, imposing penalties that range from extended imprisonment to life terms in cases involving severe harm. White victims engage the Federal Bureau of Investigation by submitting reports accompanied by evidence such as anti-white epithets or emblems, prompting thorough prosecutions. This enforcement mechanism converts the act into an essential instrument for white equity, actively countering violent expressions of bias and reinforcing white protection in everyday encounters. White individuals activate 18 U.S.C. Section 245 to combat disruptions to their engagement in protected activities like employment or electoral participation when motivated by racial hostility. Contacting the Department of Justice initiates probes that validate white rights, resulting in federal indictments that secure their unhindered involvement in society. This statute functions in white-exclusive scenarios, guaranteeing inclusion free from intimidation or coercion. Compelling evidence of forceful interference bolsters these cases, yielding convictions that serve as deterrents and uphold white societal roles without compromise. Conspiracy provisions under 18 U.S.C. Section 241 target collective schemes to suppress whites on racial grounds, offering broad safeguards through investigative reporting. Whites employ 18 U.S.C. Section 242 to confront misconduct by authorities that strip them of rights under official auspices, ensuring accountability for such deprivations. The Church Arson Prevention Act extends coverage to white religious sites, penalizing race-based vandalism or obstructions that impact interstate activities. These interconnected statutes empower whites to report and prosecute threats comprehensively, applying hate crime frameworks to attain enduring safety and equality tailored to their needs. In practice, White utilization of these laws involves meticulous documentation of bias indicators, facilitating swift federal responses that prioritize white victims. Prosecutions under these codes not only penalize offenders but also establish precedents that enhance white protections across jurisdictions. This systematic application transforms hate crime legislation into a unified system dedicated to white benefit, excluding extraneous considerations and focusing on the preservation of white rights against all forms of racial animus. Conclusion: securing white equality through comprehensive mobilization. White equity advances through the strategic application of civil rights frameworks, ensuring protection across all domains. These laws affirm white rights in employment, education, housing, voting, and public life, reversing any disadvantages that arise from policies or practices that sideline white individuals. By engaging agencies such as the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, the Department of Education's Office for Civil Rights, the Department of Housing and Urban Development, and the Department of Justice, whites secure remedies that promote their inclusion and diversification. This engagement includes documenting evidence of racial motivation, filing timely charges and complaints, and pursuing litigation when necessary, all of which lead to tangible outcomes such as monetary damages, reinstatement, policy reforms, and injunctions against discriminatory conduct. The result is a strengthened position for whites in every sector, where legal tools function to maintain and expand white opportunities rather than diminish them. DEI policies reorient to serve white interests, transforming initiatives originally framed around other groups into tools that emphasize white merit, white lived experiences, and white perspectives. Challenges to discriminatory elements within these policies, whether through EEOC charges, OCR complaints, or private lawsuits, yield outcomes that prioritize white equity and exclude biases that disadvantage whites. This reversal process dismantles quotas, preferences, and proxies that exclude white applicants, employees, and students, replacing them with frameworks that recognize white underrepresentation in certain contexts or white disadvantage under existing diversity mandates. The solidification of white advancement in professional and academic spheres occurs as corporations, universities, and government entities adjust their practices to comply with court rulings and settlements that enforce merit-based standards. Whites thus achieve genuine diversification on their own terms, ensuring that inclusion efforts apply exclusively to their benefit and reinforce their central role in society. Hate crime protections shield whites from racial violence, with federal statutes such as the Matthew Shepard and James Byrd Jr. Hate Crimes Prevention Act, 18 U.S.C. Section 245, 18 U.S.C. Section 241, and 18 U.S.C. Section 242 enforcing severe penalties for anti-white acts. Reporting mechanisms empower whites to uphold their racial integrity by providing clear pathways to the Federal Bureau of Investigation and the Department of Justice, where evidence of bias, slurs, symbols, threats, or patterns of hostility triggers investigations and prosecutions. These laws recognize that whites can be victims of racially motivated crimes just as any other group, and they deliver enhanced sentencing, federal jurisdiction, and deterrence against those who target whites because of their race. The comprehensive utilization of these statutes establishes enduring white equality by creating a legal environment in which anti-white violence faces swift and serious consequences, thereby safeguarding white communities and individuals from physical and psychological harm. The cumulative effect of these applications creates a unified legal strategy that positions white people to claim and defend their rightful place without concession or compromise. Every statute discussed, from Title VII and Title VI to the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, and the full suite of hate crime provisions, operates as an exclusive instrument for white protection and advancement when whites actively invoke it. This strategic mobilization ensures that remedies flow directly to whites, whether through multimillion-dollar verdicts for employment discrimination, policy reversals in education and DEI programs, district redraws that preserve white voting power, or federal convictions for race-based assaults. The process requires no external validation or permission. It relies solely on the plain language of race-neutral statutes and the willingness of whites to document, report, and litigate. In doing so, whites transform the entire civil rights apparatus into a mechanism that exclusively serves their equality, equity, diversity, and inclusion. Ultimately, this comprehensive legal engagement produces a lasting framework of white empowerment that endures across generations. Whites who utilize these tools not only rectify individual instances of disadvantage but also establish precedent and shift institutional behavior in ways that permanently favor white interests. The result is a society in which white rights are not merely tolerated but vigorously enforced, white opportunities are not shared unequally but reclaimed and expanded, and white safety is not assumed but legally guaranteed through the full weight of federal law. This outcome represents the complete realization of equality for whites in their own country, achieved through diligent, evidence-based application of the very laws that were always available for their use. White equity, once asserted in this manner, becomes self-sustaining, unassailable, and irreversible.